The sun's set already. It's dark out. The distant crashing of the waves, silenced by the thick brick walls of the looming lighthouse. The only audible sound to accompany me, my boots clacking along the stone floor and metallic stairs, with the infrequent creaking of the supply room door. With a lamp and oil pitcher in hand, I take a moment to appreciate the cold yet comforting vistas of an open moonlight-soaked ocean and barren landscape, save for the humble cottage I reside in during the daylight hours. I left a record player next to the crank at the top of the tower to break the deafening silence I've grown so accustomed to. It's unwise to go without change in one's sinister environment. Up the ladder lies the precious lamp. Like a delicate egg in a robin's nest, I maintain it. From the only other door leading outside is the balcony, where the window holes in the brick walls provide a fair view. The experience of both extreme height and unparalleled visibility gives for an unrivaled exposure to the world. Having turned the crank, causing the sandbags to ascend, I make my way for the oil supply that I had foolishly forgotten to collect from. With dark ambience of both somber orchestral melodies and a room nearly as black as the night, I took to the lighthouse's cellar with the flame in my lamp as my guide. However, despite the warnings my instincts drew out in clear ink, I was both shocked and curious to the strange figure of a man dressed in keeper's attire, standing just beyond the reaches of my lamp's illuminating embrace. I was admittedly unsettled by the ordeal, though it did not stop me from cautiously pursuing this intruder. No matter my efforts, the figure remained out of reach until we both came into a wall where he vanished. Goosebumps rose along my skin, hair stood up on my neck, and a brief cold blew down my back. I left, not in a rush of fear, but in a slow state of shock induced by this dreadful encounter. Perhaps this isolated place wasn't so lifeless after all. After having reached the ladder to make my return, I took a quick glance, expecting a figure to jump out of me. Instead, the same being returned to their post, motionless, neither inviting nor deterring, neither friend nor foe, just out of reach, as he had been before. Returning to the lamp, a thunderous pounding against the door echoed throughout the building. I attributed it to nothing more than paranoia what with my encounter. With the oil, the lamp was lit, and the lighthouse shone its rays as warnings to all those who come across this squalid island. Another long night.
Previous keeper disappeared. I suppose he ran away on a boat. Left the duty of the bastard. Now there's no one on the island. The establishment will need an assistant soon, and I will get back to you here in a week. Don't lose your mind from the loneliness.
And thus we arrive to the nameless island, where we are tasked with maintaining the sole monolith on the highest point, the lighthouse. The boatman, without any more words, rows away from the pier, leaving us with the sounds of the ocean and the squawking of seagulls. Luggage in hand, the gulls make way for us, the crunching of the stone beach under our feet, followed by a small grassland leading up the hill. On one side, a peninsula decorated with the only trees on the island. On the other, our modest dwelling and place of work. The trees appear to have been planted so they may watch over the isle, and even more so, anyone who comes to the peninsula, the looming sentinels remaining steadfast in the wind. Returning to the beaten trail, used by keepers past, a tool shed, lit with a small candle that undoubtedly won't last the day, and a homely cabin followed by our place of work when the sunlight descends and moonlight rises. Inside of the cabin, a clock ticks away without our intervention. Beside it, a book open to the page of what appears to be an illustration of the lighthouse, accompanied by indecipherable words, along with the key to the lighthouse itself. The room contains 2 beds, one left made and unused, while the other has been left in disarray. From the corridor to the kitchen, an oily splotch is left on the ground, likely from the previous keeper. Along with this mess, moldy stew, aged meat, and bread unfit even for toast are left in their place, as though all is well. Utensils and plates had been left for a meal that never was, and above, a gaping hole is boarded over, the cause of which is not clear at this time. By the end of our exploration, we open our suitcase and retrieve a medallion with an illustration of the lighthouse. It slots perfectly into the chest conveniently left in our room. Why are we in possession of such an artifact? And what is its purpose? It's unclear beyond the obvious. By the time we emerge from our comfortable, albeit unnerving living space, the sun has fallen, and we must work. Inside, the lamp had been left in the storage room, whereas the oil pitcher had been dropped upstairs, as though whoever held it vanished. As for the innocuous cellar door, it has been locked. The routine is the same, though we are granted the freedom to leave the tower this night. But why do that when we are safely enclosed in stone walls, have a blinding light to ward off those that may be unfortunate enough to find this island, and the comforting melodies of orchestral music laced in with overpowering droning that has been with us since nightfall? Perhaps there is no one else. Perhaps we are the only one, save for the birds and distant trio of trees. Perhaps no one lives under the lighthouse. No One Lives Under the Lighthouse is a game published and developed by Sowoke Entertainment Bureau. According to the Steam page, it is described as a slow-burn retro horror game, where we are left on an island off the coast of the United States to tend to the lighthouse after the previous keeper vanished without a trace. We are alone and without contact with the outside world. No radio, no companion, only nature and her tricks. And of those tricks, she has plenty. Each one accompanied by monotonous droning or everyday activity of household objects, like the ticking clock in our cabin or the vintage gramophone playing in the tower. Although the imposing dead trees are far off on the other side of the island, the feeling of being watched is never truly shaken. The title alone gives us reason to believe that we are not alone, or at the very least won't be alone for long. But that isn't our focus. What is the immovable dread that is placed on us like a curse. We are constantly exposed to unnatural events, unsettling tasks, and unnerving noises. However, we aren't solely left to a typical horror environment at all times. Although the isolation may be frightening on its own to some, there is solace to be found alone in the middle of the day on an island with nothing more than the sounds of waves, winds, birds, your own footsteps, and your thoughts. There is, of course, a period of respite before the crescendo begins, taking us to new heights. This moment in time is only the stepping stone for a slow descent through paranoia, dreading what's on the horizon. One of the greatest forms of tension building is not done through words or visible actions, but leftovers from past events. A table left set for another meal that never was. Distant static figures or imagery that vanish upon closer inspection, leaving the onlooker questioning whether anything was there to begin with, or something as mundane as furniture and belongings left in inordinate arrangement. In these instances, imagination takes the wheel and fills the gaps. Considering the lack of visual and concrete clarification, the mind not only fills these gaps, but builds bridges across these chasms of uncertainty. Theory crafting and hypothesizing on the subjects take hold, and from there, the artist's job is done. They have you thinking, they have you worrying, they have you wondering, why? How? What's the cause? What's the purpose? Where are the roots to this corrupt tree, and where do they take us? As one would expect, the landscape evolves with our time on the island. Flocks of birds gather in new locations, items are misplaced, weather changes in intensity, and props and structures are altered. That isn't to say that all alterations occur without our presence. By sunset on the second day, at the end of our tasks, the droning rolls in. The routine is the same: tend to the lighthouse's needs, light the lamp, and wait out the night. Upon returning to the interior of the lighthouse, we find that the walls have been desecrated and the pulley tampered. Thankfully, the record player remains intact. Repairs are needed, therefore we must venture out. 3 sandbags and a rope are required for proper functionality. 3 opportunities for something to occur, or not. With each bag, the cold hand of dread grips ever tighter on your shoulder, with each trek to and from the tool shed. And like a house of cards, the relative peace of the situation crumbles. Given these factors, we're left with a couple tools to bring comfort in our disturbing journeys. A reliable lamp, and, if you're observant, a crucifix placed in our living quarters that we may take on our travels. Utility, although tangible and presently effective, may be outweighed by faith. However, there is only so much a prayer and a symbol can do in such dire conditions. Notwithstanding spoiling the entirety of the second night and onward, I would like to draw attention to a fascinating quality of the game: its cracks, and how it gradually breaks down from a portrayal of a relatively simple haunting to something more, something extreme. The slight slits in the wall that we can peer through, metaphorically of course, give us insight on pre-existing but otherwise hidden details of this world. For your own sake, I suggest you experience this artwork yourself before continuing, as touching on any other aspect is difficult without exploring the more cryptic and obtuse features of the game. Your timer begins. The glass begins caving under the pressure. The violent buzzing is both above and below. We are trapped no matter our efforts. But as the warning light of the lighthouse lured in the swarm, its departure is the cause of their retreat. A knocking pierces through the aftershock of the buzzing and gramophone. It lets off, only for the lighthouse's lamp to reignite in a virtuous, blinding flash, acting as a knight raising his shield to protect its vulnerable internals. Brass droning plays as though it had been victorious against its combatant in a near-prophetic battle where the inanimate structure was both sword and shield to itself. And we awake, once more in the safety of our cabin, uncertain as to how exactly we got there after experiencing such an anomaly. Now that we are on to the third day, I believe it's time we deviate from our path and take a look at another exemplary tool Dread utilizes: audio. Perhaps one of the most important details in horror media is the audio. A setting can be visually off-putting yet lack any meaningful audio design, resulting in an obvious attempt with lackluster results. The same goes for a monster design. Your creature can be the most frightening abomination in existence, but if it lacked audible authority, it would be no more intimidating than a seagull. Who would fear it if they only experienced it through sound? Leaving open aspects to the imagination is where horror is brewed and aged. Interpretation is all that is required to build upon an oversaturated yet lacking canvas and turn it into a macabre Mona Lisa. We've already grazed the natural elements, well, what we as people see as natural. In this world, there are auditory actors of all sorts that accentuate their unsettling stages. I'd like to present a few of my personal favorites, sans imagery. Let your imagination fill in the gaps. Over time, the veil parts and reveals a reality with insidious intent. The dread we have spoken of thus far has acted as a curtain, for the real show is only just beginning. The treasure is below, deep in the infected womb of the island. Constructs of deformed monstrosities of imposing scale reside in a black brick temple where a declining cult paid tribute to an invisible god, or perhaps they gave themselves over willingly. They littered this empty place of worship and fear with sacks of sinew strung up by chain. We're given but a single glimpse as to what these amalgamations of flesh are. Alive. Cocoons, larvae in the process of metamorphosis, tucked away in the safety of the abyssal entrails of the island. Like the precursors to the moths that assaulted the tower, they will emerge anew from this larval state. The deeper we descend, the more organic it becomes. From the brownish brick of the near-surface entrance to the fleshy interior of the innermost chambers, it is alive, or at least close enough to be considered alive. This island was once called home by previous inhabitants, as our trips into the past at the altars reveal. And of these villagers, none provide any comforting qualities. As expected of early American settlers, they are faithful and devoted to a god. The true deity of which they worship is both not of existing cultures or esoteric branches of pre-existing beliefs. It is neither malevolent nor benevolent. It is merely moving in parallel with nature.
Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. The Lord takes pleasure in them that fear him, and in them who hope for his mercy.
And by the end of the journey, when left in the presence of colossal effigies to supposed dead gods, we make way for the finale. A battle with no hope of survival, not with an enemy of unprecedented power, but of nature. A nature unknown to us. A nature as cryptic and as sparsely detailed as this final section of this essay. There is purpose. However many reiterations it takes, there is meaning to be found. A story with an uncertain answer and origin. The dread is not in what it is, but what it could be, and what it could mean. That is dread. Paranoia and fear intertwined into a ballet of emotions, used as a facade to conceal horrific truth and unsettling fact. The reality of the twisted matter is, no one survives under the lighthouse. On behalf of the study, thank you for your time and support. However brief it may have been, have a pleasant day.